It is 3 o'clock in Amsterdam. If you agree, we'll just launch right into it. So great that you're all here to celebrate this day with me. I can't believe a year ago that I put the video up. It's been a very steep learning curve, and thank you for being there along the way and for all your support and lovely messages and being here today. So thank you. I think we can get into the individual questions now, which starts with Anya. What's your question?
I'm currently still at the Purcell School, but I will be auditioning for Conservatoire this year. And I've not done any competitions, nor have I participated in anything like NYO or like Concertgebouw Young or Verbier Festival Junior. Like I've not done anything, so I've got nothing under my belt apart from Purcell. And I am slightly worried that maybe later on that will hinder me because no one's going to either recognize my name or that they'll look at my application if I audition for orchestras and they'll just be like, well, don't know her. Do you think that is like I don't know, I've always had that worry basically.
Okay, well, I think it's a really valid question, and I'm going to return your very good question with another question, which is, why haven't you done any competitions? Why haven't you done any auditions?
Yeah, last year I auditioned for both Concertgebouw and Verbier, and because COVID hit, I ended up not doing the audition, and now I'm too old to do the youth.
Oh, shucks. Shucks.
Yeah, and it was mainly just my teacher was like, just wait a moment just so that you can get your technique up for competitions. And now, I mean, there are still competitions going on online, but of course, I mean, as of right now, I haven't submitted anything, but I am planning to, but yeah.
Okay, well, I think that's the most important thing, is that you are planning to do something, because I think it's always a wonderful experience. Even the preparation for an audition, you get to know, of course, your piece is that much better and the understanding gets that much deeper, but you learn something about yourself as well. And every time that you perform, even if it is just an audition, even if it's just an online audition, it's training those performance muscles, if you like, because we spend so much of our time in the practice room saying, oh, that's not good, that needs to be shorter, that needs to be faster, that needs to be slower in order to get better, which is fine. We need to do that work, but we also need to find the off switch when we're on stage. Mm-hmm. And that's so important to be able to do. So the whole process, even before, whether you get accepted or not is another story, but the whole process, so I would say go for it. I'm not sure that waiting until the right moment isn't necessarily, I don't want to contradict your teacher, but I'm not saying it's always the right thing, because in a way, maybe you'll never feel ready. Maybe it's more important to choose the right piece for you, if that's an option in the audition. I would say, to come back to the essence of your question, when I look at a curriculum, I look at the age and the education and the experience, and it's a balancing act between those three factors. Now, you're still very young, so all is definitely not lost, but I would, in the coming years, and certainly if you go to music college, just be open to the experience of taking part in a competition. Even if you don't win, maybe especially if you don't win. The first international competition I did, I didn't do that well, actually. I did better than I thought I would, but I loved listening to the other people, and meeting other people. So it's always a great experience. So I would just say, go for it, and don't worry about comparing yourself with other people. We all have different times where we need different things. So just go for it, and all is definitely not lost. Okay? So say hi to your teacher Abby for me, and thank you for your brilliant question.
Thank you.
Right, now I've got next on my list DÓRA.
Sorry, my English isn't so good.
Oh,
Hungarian and
well, I can promise you it's a lot better than my Hungarian or my German. So take your time. And what is your question.
I would like to ask you how you attune to a concert before preparing on stage, and also what advice you would give to a young performer to transform anxiety into some positive energy. And it is so difficult, even if you enjoy playing and making music with all of your heart, but are you well prepared for the concert?
Yeah, great. Another great question. I can promise you that it is something that you will get better and better and better and better at, because you will find your routine. I mean, I think you told me you're 19, right? So you've still got loads of time to find out what your routine is. I think it's really important. There are two important parts to my answer, I think. One is to do as much performing and try out concerts as possible. Because as I was just saying to ANYA before, you know, we need to train our concert muscles, if you like, that experience. And that's one of the awful things about this whole lockdown experience, is that concerts have vanished. So concerts are online, but you can also, I'm talking about doing a tryout concert to a microphone in the first instance, and then to a video camera, and then to, you know, your cat, and then to your neighbours, and sort of building up the experience of that performing, and try and find which routine works best for you to prepare. Some people, I've noticed in my experience, really need to be, you know, talking about the news or what they saw on television last night to make the concert sort of part of their daily life and not such a big deal. And I tried that and it really doesn't work for me. I need to, if I can, I try and find a quiet place about 45 minutes before the concert starts to just lie down for 10 minutes and focus on my breathing, and then to do some really conscious, very deep breaths, really with all your power. Wim Hof is a great hero of mine at the moment. He's got hundreds and thousands of videos on YouTube about breathing. He's the Iceman. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He does it to be able to control his body in these extremely cold temperatures. Well, I'm not into that part of it at all, but I love his deep breathing exercises. So I think deep breathing is a really important thing. And then just reminding yourself half an hour before, 20 minutes before, 10 minutes before, 5 minutes before you go on stage, why am I doing this concert? Why am I here? And reconnecting to that joy. Because you mentioned that even if you love a piece and you want to perform and you love the flute and everything, sometimes the nerves get in the way, and we all have experienced that. But trying to reconnect to why you're on stage, I think, is really important. And the final part to my answer, I think, would be, don't forget that adrenaline, which we tend to think as being this sort of evil thing that makes your legs shake and your lung capacity reduced and everything, it actually has so much to give you. That excitement, reconnect to the feeling of excitement before you go on stage, rather than thinking that you're nervous. Just say, yeah, I'm really excited. I can't wait to share this story with the audience. Just by putting a different label on it, I think can work very well, for me anyway. And I think that over the years, you will undoubtedly find your way of dealing with things. But physical rest, get those lungs working, because if you're really breathing deeply in and out, you can't get nervous about anything, because that takes so much energy. Reconnecting to why you want to do it, and to remember that adrenaline is a superpower. I don't know whether you have an advert in Hungary for this energy drink called Red Bull, that Red Bull gives you wings. Well, I think adrenaline gives you wings, you know, it gives you the power to be able to fly. So embrace it and enjoy telling your story. Does that answer your question, Dora? Okay, thank you so much. Bye-bye. So now we're moving on to Sirius's questions. Hello.
So I wanted to ask about Mozart's concerto. So I was wondering if it actually makes a difference if we play our own cadenza for whichever Mozart concerto during an orchestra audition or international competition, if that makes a difference. So yeah.
Right. Well, quite often in an international competition, it will be specified that you have to write your own cadenza. So I would get practicing with that, even if you haven't, applied for a competition. Quite often it is specified, and I think it does show, your creativity as a musician and your storytelling powers, what you understand of the score. Don't forget to look at the bass line and the inner voices for little bits of Mozart that you can maybe steal and put into the flute part. In terms of an orchestral audition, I would say probably take more of a standard text if they don't specify that it has to be your own cadenza. That could be Henley edition. In the Bernreiter edition, there are good examples of musical fragments that you could piece them together in your own order and do something like that, sort of not too controversial. The most important thing, and the thing that I find people often fall into the trap of playing their hero's cadenza, and it suits their hero brilliantly and shows off their strengths and hides their weaknesses, if they have any. But I see quite often people playing an inappropriate cadenza, and what I mean by that is a cadenza which highlights their weaknesses and hides their strengths. So I don't think there's a hard and fast rule, unless it's absolutely specified that it has to be your cadenza. For an orchestral audition, I would take something a little more standard, maybe even some of the more flashy cadenzas, which I wouldn't personally play in a concert, because I do think it's sort of inappropriate. But if, for example, you've only got Mozart in the first round, that might be a moment to show a little bit of your whizzy finger technique or something. So I don't think there's a hard and fast rule in that sense, but I think that would be my answer. And do just sort of practice cadenza writing, because you will get better with every day that you do it. So have you written your own cadenzas yet?
I had one years ago, but I think I need another one.
Okay. The way I did it, actually, the first time I had to write a cadenza was for the Kobe competition 150 years ago, and I had sort of an outline, but I didn't think I was going to get to the final, so I really hadn't worked it out, and so I wouldn't recommend doing that. I would certainly have something, even if you think the chance of getting to the final is minimal. I would still make sure that you're ready, because I wasted a lot of my pre-final practice time on sort of thinking, now how am I going to get back to the tonic? So don't do that. For the recording I made of the G major concerto, I'd actually planned to play the cadenza that I'd always played, which was, I think, a Rampal cadenza from the Rampal book, And then a week before, I discovered that all the other wind players, they were all writing their own cadenza. So I sort of had a week to write a cadenza. Also not a good way to approach it. But I just wrote, every day I wrote 16 bars. And then pinned the best bits of it together and hope for the best. So don't do it that way.
Sure.
But yeah, good luck.
Thank
Good
you.
luck. Nice to see you, Sirius.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for your question. Right, we're moving on now to CLIO, I think. CLIO in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
Hello, CLIO. What's your question?
I was wondering, could you tell us a bit about what your journey was like after you finished studying at Conservatoire before you got your job at Concertgebouw? And anything about the audition process for that.
Okay. Well, I graduated. I was on the Zoom chat with my mum yesterday, and I said, it's 30 years ago this year that I graduated. So it is. I'll have to dig deep into my memory to remember exactly what happened. But the way I remember it is this. I had my final exam in June of 91, and in I think it was March or April before that, I was approached if I wanted to do 3.5 months work in an opera orchestra, Glyndebourne Touring Opera, and it's a sort of regular freelance orchestra which does that autumn season and then a 1 month season in the summer. And I said, yes, please, that would be lovely. And at the same time, I planned to go to Paris to go and study at the Paris Conservatoire for a year, from September until July. But obviously I couldn't do both. Or could I thought, shall I be very cheeky and see whether my teacher in Paris would let me have my lessons privately rather than being enrolled in the Conservatoire? And thankfully he said yes, that was Alain Marion. And so I did my first term out of Conservatoire, Music College. I played in Glyndebourne Touring Opera, which was an incredible experience. I didn't know anything about opera. I had a lot of symphonic experience, but no opera experience at all. And my colleagues were very supportive and we all had a great time. And then I went off to Paris to study in January. And then Glyndebourne asked me back the following year. So that was my first year and a half, basically, covered by those two things. And then I did an audition for BBC Welsh and shortly after a BBC Symphony Orchestra. And so I was on trial for those. And for those of you who don't know how the British trial system works, that can be a long drawn out process where half a dozen or a dozen people each get a project, and then they get a week, and then they get a month, and the list gets smaller and smaller and smaller until someone is offered the job. And that someone was me for the BBC Welsh, and it wasn't me for the BBC Symphony. And shortly after I started in BBC Welsh, I flew over to Amsterdam to do my audition here. And I ended up doing 5 months with the BBC Welsh before starting here. So I was extremely lucky. And in between the trial work, I did quite a lot of freelance work. And I've taught from the first year as an undergraduate, straight out of school, and then I was instrumental teaching at a girls' school not far away. So I've always taught, and that's been a wonderful way to learn, actually. Is to teach. You have to explain to someone else why you do things in a certain way, so that was wonderful. And yeah, the Concertgebouw audition process, the first 2 rounds are behind a screen and were quite short. At that time in the UK, auditions, you would go in and play your 2 set pieces with piano, and then it was all sort of sight reading, as in you didn't know what was going to appear on the stand. And of course, most of it was prepared, so it would be Daphnis or L'Après-Midi or Mendelssohn Scherzo, so sort of known pieces, but you never got a list. So I was quite surprised with the Concertgebouw that I got a list of those 10 pieces to do. So I sort of actually compared to some of the audition preparation I'd had in the UK, I thought, oh, well, this is all right, isn't it? I know which 10 pieces, so I'll just knuckle down and work on those. And I quite liked playing behind a curtain. It just felt very liberating somehow, playing behind a screen. And then the final was without a screen, and I don't remember anything about that. I mean, I think I was in such a hyper concentrated, focused mode that I sort of came off stage and thought, oh yes, finished. I think I was in a sort of bit of a kind of, yeah, I think it's what's known as being in the zone, but how I got there, I think that was just the angels flying in the right direction on the right day. But yes, I was very, very lucky. I would say that as a freelancer, I was not afraid of taking on any work that was offered to me. So don't be afraid to play piccolo, don't be afraid to play alto flute, practice your sight reading, be prepared to jump in, the last minute and those sort of things. And then just prepare for everything as well as you possibly can. So for auditions and everything, once you have an opportunity, make sure you grab it with both hands and really show yourself and your playing at its best.
Thank you.
Has that answered your question?
That was really, really interesting.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, CLIO. Bye. Who have we got next? I think KERRY's up next. We're keeping it Scottish.
Hi.
Hi, KERRY. What's your question?
I just wanted to ask you, so how do you warm up in a way that lets you reconnect with all the different parts that you want to be flowing and working for when you have to play.
Yeah, it's something we all worry, am I doing this right, sort of thing. And I don't think there is really a right way for everyone. Not much is going to come out of a flute unless you're using your air. And so your whole breathing machine needs to be really working as well as it possibly can. So if you've got a limited amount of time, my go-to exercises would be usually breathing without the flute. Just get the whole apparatus relaxed and working efficiently. And then I would next move on to maybe some long low register notes, and from that some harmonics and maybe some upside down harmonics. I don't find warming up my fingers. I'm not one for playing my scales at 200 miles an hour just before going on stage. For me, that doesn't really help with pre-stage, before a concert or before a rehearsal or anything. So for me, it's much more important that my air and my sound are working, and then I can work from that. But as I say, I think we're all different, and every day might be different. If I'm doing some pieces which involve a lot of staccato, then I might do a few Tafnel Gobe rounds with various different articulations, just to make sure that my tongue is awake and doing what it should be doing. But for me, it all comes down to air. And firstly, without the flute, I think that's something that I came to too late, maybe in my life, to really appreciate how important that is. So, what do you do to warm up?
Me, straw breathing. I really love doing that. So yes, some different breathing exercises, and then something to loosen up my jaw and my lips.
Right.
So yeah, I have just some different exercises, some funny noises that I can make, and lip trills, and just things to get them going. But yeah, that's mainly what I do.
Yeah. Excellent. Good.
Thank you.
Flutter tonguing is a good one as well, to get everything sort of flowing. Yeah. Because you can't really manage that without a good airflow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
Kerry. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Who are we on to now? Martina.
Hello.
Martina. Hello, Martina. We're keeping it in the British Isles.
We are indeed.
Martina in Ireland.
My question is, what advice would you have for finding your own unique sound? Where should we seek inspiration for it without leading down the kind of the rabbit hole of imitating another flute player that maybe we aspire towards? And then also, one thing that I come across as I continue to study is my musical perception is getting stronger, which is great, but then my ideal sound changes, which can be a little bit disheartening when you kind of feel like you've got your ideal sound and then you kind of start nitpicking at it. So how do you continuously stay on top of finding this sound that you want to create for yourself, please?
Interesting question. Well, firstly, I don't think there's any harm at all in trying to copy, as long as you're aware of thinking, why do I like that sound? What is it about the colour? What is it about the vibrato? What is, and analysing it as well. So that will help reinforce what you find special and speaks to you. But, if you think about the great painters in history, I remember seeing the first painting that Picasso ever exhibited, I think, and thinking, but that's not Picasso. He hadn't found his voice yet, but he was copying, the style of another painter. And the same goes for Van Gogh. When you take two painters who've found their own voice and their own styles, but they didn't start off painting like that. They started off by replicating great masters. And so I don't think there's any shame at all in trying to emulate a sound that you love. That could be a singer, it could be a violinist, it could be a flute player, but it doesn't have to be. But I think just adding that layer of awareness to, well, why does that speak to me in such a way? And then the other part of my answer, I think, would be about what is the perfect sound. I don't think the perfect sound exists, because I think sound is changing all the time. Yeah. So what might be the perfect sound for that note might be completely the wrong sound for something else. So, you know, have fun. I encourage people to spend the last 5 minutes of every practice session just improvising, playing with your sound. What can I do on that note? Why is that note more flexible than that note? And just sort of mucking around with sound and exploring. And you know, what's 5 minutes? Everyone's got 5 minutes, right? However busy your day is, just give yourself that gift of 5 minutes to just explore and see what's possible and what's impossible on your instrument. What happens to that sound in reaction to a very small vibrato, a very fast vibrato? What happens to that color? Or if I use that vibrato, what happens to the size of the sound? What works best in forte? What works best in piano? And, you know, so just being flexible and always searching. And I think that search, you know, hopefully will carry on our whole lives, because I don't think there is one perfect sound. So keep exploring, keep being interested in sound, because that's your voice.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Great answer. Yeah, thank you so much.
Great. So, REIKO. Yes, there you are. Hello, hello. It's very late for you. Late on a Friday night.
Yes.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for all your wonderful Japanese translations.
Oh, thank you for your wonderful tutorial videos. As
What was your question, REIKO?
my question is just about your tutorial videos, and I'm very curious what topics you're going to cover in the future.
Ah, you want to get your translation juices flowing ready.
Kind of.
The next, I think that the next videos are going to be a little series of my 5 favorite flute books. And I think the first one is going to be Moy's 24 Little Melodic Studies, and how to practice them, why they're useful, and maybe playing one or two, giving an example. For those of you watching, REIKO for many years has been translating my class in Kirishima Festival in Japan, and we often did sessions on Moy's 24 Little Melodic Studies, didn't we?
Yeah.
And such a useful teaching tool, I think. You know, the melodies are simple, you can sight read them pretty much. You can really polish them. I'm still practicing them, and I've been practicing them for, you know, more than 30 years. So that's going to be the first book, and then 4 others. I know what they are, but I don't think I'm quite ready to make them public yet. But the question is when I'm going to be able to film, because I was initially just going to do 10 in the 10 weeks of lockdown. And then I got so many lovely reactions, and people say, oh, please, can you do a video about this? Oh, please, can you do a video about that? And so it's got stretched, and here we are a year later. And so I do try and make them when and as I can, but they do take quite a lot of time. As I'm sure they take a lot of time to translate. So thank you for all your hard work.
It's a great pleasure. Great honor. Thank you.
Thank you, REIKO. It's lovely to see you again.
Yeah, lovely to see you. Yes. Thank you.
REIKO and I studied together in London at the academy together. So we've known each other a long time. Thank you, REIKO. Oyasumi nasai.
It's me.
So I've got Fred up next. Hey!
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Yeah, I was wondering about you know, you've been a flute player in the UK and in continental Europe, and from my experience at least, there's sort of quite a different notion of what's good flute playing, what's desirable for an orchestra, what's desirable for blending, soloist, etc. And as someone who's sort of trying to make it in both places, I often find that in the continent people tell me I'm too British, and in the UK people tell me I'm too French. And I'm sort of finding that balance, because for me, I appreciate such a sort of range of flute players, from you to Karen Jones to Sam, to Catherine Baker, who just all play so differently, but all with some of the sort of similar British school about them. But so with the sort of airy sound or the pure sound, how do you think in continental Europe, is it right that I have this idea that it's sort of more appreciated and preferred that you have that sort of more round French pure sound, or is that sort of a myth and you think at this point like everyone's just up for listening to anything?
You know, I think the flute schools are blending so much, and as each year goes by and the world becomes smaller and smaller, I think that the different styles seem to converge, is my experience. So to be honest, let's say I've never thought about it in that way, as being, you know, in the UK is this sound and in the continent is that sort of sound. So I'm quite curious to hear you, as someone who is not from the UK but did all your studying there, how you see that is quite interesting. At the end of the day, you know, I think a musical personality and having a story to tell and turning a phrase in a way that makes people think, oh, I didn't realise that was such a special moment, or, you know, whatever it happens to be. To me, that is much more important, listening on an audition panel, for example, than, you know, giving someone the stamp of, oh, that's a UK sound, oh, that's a French sound. I think even if we look at French players or British players, as you say, there's so much variety within that national style, if there is such a thing. I'm not so, I'm not going to say conscious of there being different styles. I don't think it's that important. I think it's much more important that someone tells their story and has a musical personality and thinks about what they're playing and how that relates to what else is going on. And being a conscious musician is more important to me than whether you have that sort of sound or that sort of sound. I would suggest. Yeah, does that sort of answer your question? Or
yeah, I think it's mostly because when I'm anticipating, you know, oh, there's these jobs coming up in France, is there even any point going for a job in France, and the investment, the hotels, the flights to get there, and like not even stand a chance because they know what they want, what kind of sound they want from Paris Conservatoire, and I just don't have that. So is there any point even investing in that?
You're a wonderful player, and I'm sure you'll find your place when the time is right. And the place is right.
Thank you very much.
Lovely to see you, Fred. And thank you so much for all your hard work with the translations.
Of course, it's a pleasure. Yeah.
Thanks. So, we're going to Janice next, I think.
Hi.
Hi, Janice. Breakfast time in Puerto Rico.
Yes. So my question is, it maybe has to do a little bit with the first ones, but all of your knowledge that you might have of a certain piece that you're going to perform, whether that be historical, emotional, or the connection you might have with it, how do you translate that into your playing during a performance? Like what goes on in your head during that performance?
Gosh, that's a really deep question. This is great, and I think it can be answered on lots of different levels. And I think that one of the first things when I'm teaching in a masterclass situation, usually I haven't heard the person play before, and one of the first questions I often ask is, what do you want the audience to be feeling at the beginning of this piece, or as you're playing this piece, or whatever? And I'm quite surprised that there's often a lot of hesitation with, oh yes, I suppose there isn't an audience there we should be thinking about. Maybe it's rabbits in the headlight feeling of being in a masterclass and put on the spot. But I would say that, you know, just connecting to the story that you're telling in the broadest sense, the emotion that you want to convey. And we're in the practice room really thinking about how you can convey, let's say we're trying to convey an emotion of sadness or something. So to really be quite technical with the sense of how am I going to convey that sort of sound, quite analytical. And so maybe a sad sound, maybe we're not going to be on the louder end of the spectrum, but maybe on the softer side. Maybe the vibrato is going to be something smoother, softer, slower, rather than vibrant, buzzing vibrato, what have you. So that's on this sort of very broad way of answering the question. In terms of, for example, orchestral excerpts, because I think that the key to performing orchestral excerpts is really to show the jury that you know the score, right? And that's kind of your question, I guess. How do I convey to the jury that I understand the score? And I think we can do that with lots of different ways, but essentially by knowing what else is happening in the score. Am I in unison with someone else, or is my line popped into my head eroica? To know that you're playing with violins, with the whole violin section, so that piano in the flute part is related to it being a solo line 1 octave above the first violins, and there might well be 14 of them. So knowing what that piano means in that context, knowing what kind of sound is going to blend with those nice shiny vibrato-y high violins. In another place, you might like to show that you know that you're playing this with clarinets. And so then I would use less focused sound, perhaps less vibrato in the sound, maybe no vibrato. There might be a passage, I'm thinking now of Carmen, for example, when you've been the solo voice after the first 2 bars of the harp in the entr'acte, and the flute has the first 8 bars, and then to show at letter A or figure 1 or whatever it is, that you then become the second voice. How are you going to do that? Well, that's going to be a change of combination of dynamic, color, and vibrato. In answer to your question, sorry, it's a little bit rambling, but I think I would first take a step back and say, okay, what do I want this whole piece to say? What is the whole context? Which year was this piece written in? What was the context in which it was written? So I love doing all the research into who commissioned the piece. Was it a commission? What was happening in the world when a piece was written? Having that sort of very broad sense of a piece's stylistic position in the history of music. So I wouldn't play the same piano in a Mozart concerto as I would in that place in the Eroica that I just sang, or in the Firebird. You know, they would have quite different meanings in terms of the kind of sound you use, the kind of vibrato you use, the kind of color, the kind of intensity. So it all comes down to sound in both the macro sense, a piece's historical context and what you want to convey with that piece, and in the micro context, what else is happening in the score. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Janice. Morgan, I think, is up next. Hi, Morgan.
Hi.
Hi.
My question, I'm wondering if you would be willing to share some insight on setup, deciding on how to set up your instrument, like head joint placement, or using maybe like the thumbport. And also, maybe you have some personal experience or insight on opinions or judgment about those things at the professional level.
Right. Well, I think that is certainly something that at some point I might do a video about sort of gadgets and things, because I have used the thumbport since it appeared on the market. I think I had one of the very earliest ones. And the same with the Le Frec Have you come across the Le Frec? And I've heard people saying, and I will tell you in a minute who, I have heard people say, oh wow, but you really use that like in concert, but you're a professional. Yeah, because those weren't the professionals saying that. So I think it's a perception. Something like Le Frec or thumbport, it's so personal whether you feel it makes a difference to your playing. Personally, I think that for I wouldn't like to be without either of them. I use a thumbport, and it really has helped my right hand be much more relaxed, having my thumb here instead of having my thumb here. And the thumbport is able me to do that. I do think that positioning the thumbport is important, and I position it, I don't have my flute right with me, but I position it as high up the instrument as it can be, obviously in the thumb position, but as far as the thumb will allow, with the two little levers behind, and as high on the barrel as possible. But that's a personal thing as well, because there's a Model 2 thumbport, where the arm is much lower and sits much lower on the tubing. So that's something to try. And the Le Frec, I have, with my hand on my heart, I love playing with it. I always play on it, on my gold flute, on my piccolo, on my alto flute. I don't use it for my wooden flute, interestingly enough. I don't know why. It just doesn't seem to do much for the wooden flute. And different metals seem to work slightly differently. So on my gold flute, I have a gold one. On my alto flute, the brass one works the best. On the piccolo, the silver one works the best. I don't know why. Someone probably knows why, but it's not me. In terms of alignment, I have a very conventional setup with my embouchure hole in line with the middle of the keys, and the rod of the foot joint in line with the middle of the keys. But, you know, that's with my lip, with the way I blow, and I'm not saying that everyone has to do that. You know, the 5 minutes that at the end of your practice session experimenting, I would also experiment with like pulling your head joint out 1.5 centimeters. What happens? Pushing it right in. What happens? You know, turning it out, turning it in. Just, you know, having fun. And I think that all that flexibility will help you find what works best for you. Experiment and try, and don't be ashamed. I'm proud I use a thumbport. And it's fine if people think that it's stupid if I use one, you know. I'm the one who's got to go out and play my concert, so yeah, do what makes you feel good, even if it's you know, it's just in your head that you feel better. That also counts. Do anything you can to give yourself the best feeling for sharing your music. I don't think that was a terribly helpful answer, but it's the only answer I've got. I'm sorry.
No, it was wonderful.
Thank you for your question, Morgan.
Thank you.
Luca, what was your question?
Hello.
Hello.
My question is, since you played a long time in the Concertgebouw Orchestra, my question is, do you think your sound has changed over the years playing in the orchestra? And if so, in what way? And how would you adapt your sound when playing in the orchestra compared to playing solo?
Okay, well, I hope my sound has changed, because I don't think sound is something set, like we were just talking about a minute ago. I do remember that when I came to Amsterdam, you know, it's a big hall. I'm sure you've been in it. Have you played in it?
Yes, I already played in it.
Yeah. It's a big hall to fill. And I came from a hall where the treble voices, the violin and flute, were very present, prominent. And, you know, everything was too loud, too loud, too loud, too loud. And then I came to Amsterdam, I thought, oh, gosh, there's an awful lot of people out there that I've got to reach. So I do think that I had to open my sound somewhat. And I deliberately describe it as being an opening of the sound rather than it playing louder, because I think my sound has got more space in it. So I think it has got bigger, but not bigger by using more force. By allowing the space to let the more air through the instrument. I think that's the biggest change. I've had changes of instrument as well, which have obviously affected my sound and my concept of sound, maybe. So when I joined the orchestra, I was playing on a 1903 Louis Lot, and I played on that for the first 5 years in the orchestra, which is a very beautiful sound, but very, let's say, elegant and rather small. But more importantly, it was an instrument which was tuned to 440, and my orchestra tunes to 442. So I felt as if I was constantly trying to strain up to get to the pitch. Then I played for 16 years on altus, silver altus, and 4 years ago I changed to a gold Haynes 14 carat. So I think those have changed my sound somewhat as well. Although all three instruments I've always played with a Lafin head joint. So I think there is some concept of how I think my sound should be on the flute, and I think that's present whichever instrument I'm playing on. But I think it definitely has changed. And in terms of difference between your sound in the orchestra and a soloist, are you talking about being a soloist with an orchestra, or solo as in flute and piano?
I think more solo in a flute and piano, maybe.
Oh, okay. I don't consciously think, oh, now I'm playing in the orchestra, so now I've got this sound. I don't consciously think, now I'm doing a flute and piano recital. That said, there are certain fingerings, for example, which I would use in an orchestral tutti, where keeping the pitch low is the priority and making as much sound as possible, and then using a slightly, let's call it an ugly sounding note in the orchestra that might not be as noticeable as it would be in a flute and piano recital. But both demand a lot of flexibility and as wide range of colours and dynamics and attacks as you can find to make it, lively and interesting. Bring the music to life. So
great, thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you for your question. Thanks. So who we now on to Richard, I think. Richard, you warned me that you had a technical question for me.
Yes. So my question is based on my lifelong experience as a struggling student of the flute.
Okay.
So I'd like to know if, as a teacher, you often have to help a student with tone production problems, find the most suitable embouchure adjustment or lip plate position for that student's unique physical makeup. And have you ever had an obstacle in your own playing that you solved with some little tweak of the embouchure or lip plate position?
Gosh, that I tend not to do much tweaking of embouchure, partly because of the sort of teaching I do these days, to be absolutely honest. I was teaching. I had my own class in the Conservatoire in The Hague until 2007 when I left. And since then, I've only done masterclass teaching in teaching on a course or for a day or for an afternoon or something. So I don't have a continuous contact with the students. And I think that this kind of work would really be more appropriate to a sort of weekly flute lesson rather than a one-off masterclass. And aside from that, I myself have quite a crooked embouchure. So whilst I think it's good to have some guidelines, I don't think we should be prescriptive about, exactly the position between the top lip and the bottom lip. I think the ears should always be the leading, the deciding factor, if you like. So just what sounds the best, and it might be that one person is more turned in or turned out than the other. I don't think there are hard and fast rules about that. I'm afraid. Well, maybe that's nice that there aren't hard and fast rules. Again, coming back to the 5 minutes experimenting at the end of a practice session, that is a time when I would sort of just really have fun and say, okay, well, what happens if I completely turn out? Wow, I need a lot more air. Oh gosh, where am I going to get, and then you learn sort of where you can get energy from different parts of your body, as it were. Whereas if you're used to turning in a lot, then you might be less dependent on your air support. As a general rule of thumb, I think that the embouchure hole should be not more than a half or 2/3 open, as a rule of thumb. So if you can get someone to take a photograph of you as you're playing, or to have a feeling of whether you're covering the embouchure hole too much, too little. In my experience, it's more likely that people are covering too much than covering too little. But somewhere, I think the bottom lip should be about 1/3 to a half covering and 2/3 to a half open. I've thankfully not had a teacher who's tried to tweak my embouchure straight, but I know that when I went to William Bennett that I did a lot of work on getting the tension out of my lips, because I used to have an embouchure like that, and learning to trust my air column would support the sound if I didn't have that tension in the lips. That was my biggest change, I think, and it took me really quite a long time to get the feeling of that, and trusting the air to do the work rather than the pressure on the lips. Does that answer your question?
Pretty much. Thank you.
Pretty much, yeah. Have fun and experiment, I would say.
Struggling, yeah.
And let your ears lead the way. Thank you, Richard, for your question.
You're welcome. Thank you, too.
Thanks. We got Matteo next. Matteo, hello. Grazie mille for your translations.
Such a pleasure. So my question is much more about the celebration of this 1 year of YouTube activities you are and I'm wondering if this online interaction you are having during this year developed and your way of practicing and playing, and if the answer is yes, I'm wondering how.
Well, that's a good question, and thank you for bringing it back to the celebration of 1 year ago. Well, firstly, the 10 videos that I made, that was my original plan, to just do those 10 videos, and then I was so touched by all the feedback, the lockdown insanity prevention, it did help me going too insane in the lockdown as well, which was the primary purpose. At the end, when the end of the lockdown looked to be in sight and my orchestra started working again, I had to really decide, am I going to carry on with these videos or not? I think, if I'm not mistaken, the next video I did was Dvorak 8, because that was the first piece I was going to be playing in the orchestra after the lockdown. So I thought, that's a very good way of spending more time with the piece, and in a more outward way than maybe I normally would be approaching Dvorak 8. Maybe if Dvorak 8 came up on the schedule, I'd be thinking, oh no, help, it's Dvorak 8. And now I was thinking, I love playing this symphony, so why help? So it enabled me to sort of open to the experience a little bit more. I remember another video about posture, and I remember that week being very conscious of how I was sitting and how I was standing and how I was playing. That was quite a good learning one for me. Learning about my own body and learning from watching other people. And the other most important one for me was the practicing one. Having to organize my thoughts in that way was quite helpful. So it's been very interesting learning experience for me as well. Researching each of the videos, like the Flothouse video, really getting to, let's say, to know the composer. And it's something that I've always tried to do with new pieces. That was how I learned to love Nielsen, for example, when I was first asked to do it, I thought, oh, Nielsen, that's not my repertoire at all. And then by learning more about the man, I thought, oh no, but I really connect to this person. And then it made it much easier for me to connect to his music. So I think those four are the most are the ones that have, let's say, changed me the most, or made me more conscious of what I was doing.
So
I think.
Looking forward for a Nielsen video.
Oh yes, maybe. Who knows? Who knows? Thank you so much, Matteo. Thank you. And I think the last we have Teresa.
Yes, hello.
Hello, Teresa. You had a few questions, I think, but I think what would be your most important question to ask?
I think that I will ask, what's your favorite chamber, or your favorite chamber and just solo flute piece from the classical era would be?
Oh, classical, strictly classical?
Yes.
Do you mean, okay. Oh, right, then I have to get my thinking cap on a little bit. Well, you know, I mean, to quote the obvious, everyone plays the D major flute quartet of Mozart, and the other three are gorgeous. So that's a very obvious place to start, isn't it?
Yes.
Ferdinand Ries, he wrote a lovely flute quartet.
There's a quartet. Okay, we
Yeah.
came across Nada or something, I think, but there's a quartet. Okay.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Hummel.
Oh, okay.
There's a wonderful septet which has got a very virtuoso piano part. So if you've got a piano virtuoso up your sleeve, then that's a perfect. That's mixing the strings and the wind. Any Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, and I'm sold. So again, coming back to quartets, I'm just trying to think what other combinations are there that I've done. Actually, coming back to Hummel and Clementi have both done transcriptions for flute and piano trio of the last, I think in Clementi's case, the last 6 Mozart symphonies for flute and piano trio, which are wonderful. Things like, if you can go a little bit later, Louise Farronc, her trio for flute, cello and piano. And nice to have a female composer there as well. Very high, difficult cello part, and again, quite a difficult piano part. Well, I suppose Weber trio. Mendelssohn D minor piano trio. There's a contemporary transcription for flute instead of violin.
Okay.
But I suppose that would be, strictly speaking, romantic, wouldn't it? Sorry.
Rather be a little more romantic.
Yeah, yeah.
We have a violinist, so he'd probably want to play that.
Okay. Okay. Well, I hope that's given you some ideas anyway. Oh, there's a lovely Joseph Haydn. There's a contemporary of Haydn who did a transcription of the Fifths Quartet. Again, flute and 3 strings, but yeah, that's a wonderful quartet as well.
The Fifths Quartet.
Yeah, that's its nickname.
Okay.
Wonderful.
So much.
Thank you so much. Now, I wonder if we can get everyone back in view to just have a goodbye wave. Would that be a nice idea? Thank you all so much for sharing this time with me. It's been really fun. Thank you so much. Let's have a wave. Take care, sleep well, or have a wonderful day wherever you are. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.